Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Kingston WritersFest. My name is Aara Macauley. I'm the artistic director of the festival, and I'm pleased to present Brazen Tongues, Celebrating the Unashamed Self. I want to start with a content warning that tonight's discussion may explore themes of trauma, sexual violence, abuse, and mental illness. I would like to begin by acknowledging that the land on which the festival customarily takes place and where I am situated tonight is the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee peoples. We gratefully acknowledge these Indigenous nations for their ongoing guardianship of this land. We agree to peaceably share in responsibility for stewardship of this land, its water, and all of its biodiversity. All those who come to live and work here are responsible for honoring these relationships in a spirit of peace, friendship, and respect. We hope you followed the sponsor acknowledgement video that was playing before the event started. I'd like to thank Canada Council, Canadian Heritage, Ontario Arts Council, the City of Kingston, and Kingston Arts Council for their ongoing support of the festival. We're grateful to those organizations and individuals who support the festival. And tonight, I would especially like to thank Mark Sinnett, Cheri Genyk of LePage ProAlliance, Realty, who are the event sponsors of the Late Night with Kingston WritersFest series. This is the first of two events. The next one is happening tomorrow night on Saturday at 8:30. I'd like to thank Steve Page, the author patron of Molly Cross-Blanchard, and I would like to thank our arts partners, Real Out Arts Project and Kingston Pride, for helping to spread the word about this event and support us. This event is an hour long and includes a question and answer period. Feel free to type your questions into the Q&A box at any point during the event for me to read. And you'll find this box at the bottom of your Zoom screen. As a thank you for continuing to support Kingston WritersFest and joining us for the virtual edition of the festival, we will randomly select a pre-registered participant of this event following our Q&A to win a copy of both Amber Dawn and Molly's books. We're doing this for each onstage event throughout the festival, so we encourage you to sign up and have a chance to win a book. Now I am delighted to introduce the first of two authors that are joining me today, and that is Amber Dawn. Amber Dawn's poems are rituals of beauty, courage, and fierce rage. So says the Vancouver Sun. Amber Dawn is an award-winning writer and creative facilitator who has written eloquently on queer femme sexuality, individual and systemic trauma, and sex work justice. She's a winner of the Lambda Literary Award for Debut Lesbian Fiction, the Writers' Trust of Canada Dane Ogilvy Prize, and has been shortlisted for the BC Book Dorothy Livesey Poetry Prize, the Lambda Literary Award for Lesbian Fiction, the BC Book Ethel Wilson Fiction Prize, and a Sunburst Award for Excellence in Canadian Literature of the Fantastic. My Art is Killing Me and Other Poems is a finalist for the Jim Diva Prize for Writing That Provokes, and a follow-up to her Vancouver Book Award-winning memoir, How Poetry Saved My Life. Author Nancy Lee calls this collection urgent, necessary, and powerful. There's no overstating the value and importance of this book, a lifeline to survivors, a turning point, a reckoning. Please welcome Amber Dawn.
Hi, and thank you so much for this very, very warm introduction. I feel like I'm part of a group of many, many authors who don't quite receive the accolades until we kind of hear them, before we go on for a reading. It's a real gift of a host like you, Aara, to sort of like pull some of those accolades and those quotes together and just warm the virtual stage for me. So thank you so much. I am going to be reading from My Art is Killing Me and Other Poems, which has been set up so well. It does explore my own story as coming out as a queer disabled sex worker and a survivor within the writing. So the entire book doesn't look at the original experiences or original expressions of identity, but rather the many dilemmas within writing and publishing about trauma and identity. I'm going to be reading an abbreviated version of the title poem, A Stopped Clock. I was costumed in a white tiger-striped bodysuit when I found out I had been accepted into the graduate creative writing program at the University of British Columbia. The bodysuit was one size too small, and my labia majora squeezed out from either side of the gusset whenever I sat down. I sat with the other sluts, most of whom I loved like a stopped clock, around a lopsided card table inside a renovated steel barn in Huntsville, Alabama. At first, we were nervous, hauling our tickle trunks into such a rough-hewn hideaway, a barn, and pretty far outside the city. What kind of place was this for a titty show, we wondered. But there were fairy lights strung around the stage and an old-fashioned jukebox beside the bar. And when our host brought us warm tamales wrapped in tinfoil and a 1-gallon jug of homemade moonshine, we settled into the dressing room just fine. Moonshine flint behind my ears as my cell phone lit up with a 604 area code, a Vancouver area code. The admissions secretary's voice was high and bright, despite her calling from 4,000 kilometers away. She said, "I'm so happy for you, and your acceptance letter is in the mail, and you should really consider applying for a scholarship." Did the admissions secretary know that my livelihood was pussy tap? Well, it's likely the entire selections committee knew. My writing sample and my application was packed with poems about men's billfolds. The club MC announced my big news to the audience. Their clanging applause surprised me. It shouldn't have, because a whore that goes to college is adorable. Live, nude, crook to hit the books is a narrative string any fellow can feel good about tucking that fiver into. The woozy deck stage caught my stiletto as I crossed into the dusty yellow spotlight. The sound of my knees pounding the floor was barely audible against the sonic boom of burlesque. And besides, what's another bruise? What's a bruise? What's a bruise? What's a blue moon bruise to do but pull young blood to and fro like a tide? What's a bruise but a testament to the sharp art of surrendering to time and place, and how I surrendered to that stage. I bowed down to ageless filth and glitter and leaked fluid. Oh, striptease stage, oh, hollowed ground. I prayed to the ghosts of every hustler who's turned rock ballads into rent, turned grind into gold. I was going to grad school, masters of fucking arts. I face down belly rolled until I met God or a staph infection. No, this is nostalgia talking. The truth is, I uprighted myself and finished my set just like any other night. Though there was a mother in the audience, maybe several mothers, but this particular mother presented me with her virgin teenage son. I remember she wore a string of pearls, and I presume this was because we were in Alabama. The mother in pearls was interested in buying sex for her teenage son. He has to become a man before going off to college. She was certain it was his virginity that hindered him from the kingdom and the power of manhood. What she wasn't sure of is how much I should be paid for my service. I sometimes wonder, though I do not care in the slightest, if pity was the reason I was accepted into the creative writing program at the University of British Columbia. Was I their redemption story candidate of that year? Here's a fun fact. An anagram for creative writing is tragic interview. So I would have to veer into fantasy to continue this story about Alabama. I can't remember anything about the virgin teenage son, except that we were both about to be students that fall. When I try to think about what this young man looked like, I superimposed the geek from the 1984 film 16 Candles, or alternatively Brian from The Breakfast Club. You see, I grew up in a time when the meek shall inherit the prom. These movies taught me that the geek shall also inherit access to a blackout drunk cheerleader. But life rarely mimics a Hollywood ending, or does it? I guess I don't know how life works anymore. You, literally you, are listening to my queer and desperate poetry, and so I thank you, and I love you like a stopped clock. But I can't tell you whether or not I took that mother in pearls money to fuck her virgin teenage son. I guess I don't know what I can share in a poem anymore. 9 days later, the other sluts dropped me off and my bag full of animal print lingerie and the small, grimy bills I earned as tips off at O'Hare Airport in Chicago. They kept touring the Midwest, Milwaukee, maybe Minneapolis, and eventually into the lonesome sphere of memory. These days, if I can't find an old friend through Google, I worry they may be dead. I flew back to Vancouver to attend the University of British Columbia, where more than one professor warned me not to treat poetry like a therapy session. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Amber Dawn. Yeah, it's such a powerful start to that collection. Now I'd like to introduce our other poet for tonight, and this is Molly Cross-Blanchard. Molly is a white and Métis writer and editor born on Treaty 3 territory, Fort Frances, Ontario, raised on Treaty 6 territory, Prince Albert, Saskatchewan, and living on the unceded territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh people in Vancouver, BC. She holds an English BA from the University of Winnipeg and a creative writing MFA from the University of British Columbia, and is the publisher of Room magazine. Exhibitionist is a collection of smart, raunchy poems that oscillate between a complete rejection of shame and the consuming heaviness of it. Reviewer Sarah Dowling says Exhibitionist, as its title suggests, puts the reviled and rejected parts of womanhood on display, offering a well-curated tour of the things that don't appear within woman's book womanhood, like being a weird teenager or farting or wanting sex or living on the edge of the whiteness that defines conventional femininity. Please welcome Molly.
Thank you. Oh my God, I'm so glad you pulled from Sarah Dowling's review, because when I read that, I sobbed for like an hour. It was the most touching thing that I have ever read about my work. And I still go back and read it like once a week because it was just such a gift. So thank you for bringing that to my introduction. Hello, everyone. My name is Molly Cross-Blanchard. I live, as Aara said, on the unceded territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples. I just moved last week, so I now live on Kingsway, which used to be a footpath going through a very dense forest of cedar and fir and hemlock trees that was used by the people who are Indigenous to this place for many years. And I'm very grateful to know that about the place that I live, and I'm grateful to live here. Thank you for your reading, Amber Dawn. You started with the beginning of your book, so I think I'm going to start with the beginning of my book too, and switch it up a bit, because you open with this really arresting image of the labia outside of the bodysuit, and I similarly open my book with a pussy imagery, so I think it feels right. This is Exhibitionist. The most orgasms I ever had in one go come over Christmas vacation in my childhood basement bedroom. Door cracked open, sheets peeled back, pussy in plain view of the cat clawing carpet. Is this how flashers feel in their trench coats and chest hair? I'd like to sit in the park with my thumb stuck up my nose and wait for someone to notice. I want to be more like the woman in Burger King who eats fries straight off the floor. The woman who cries in Walmart when her preteen son says, "Fuck you, Mom," for the first time in front of the greeter yanking carts. At the strip club, I eat onion rings, watch the dancer watching me from upside down in her halo of light. When will my roommate notice the way I air dry underwear on the corner of the hallway mirror, symbol of sex in his reflection? I want to feel like a display model lipstick, dug at nub smeared across the mouths of strangers, a much handled sample of the real thing. The next poem I'm going to read is from later in the collection. It's a bit of a longer poem called "This is a Poem I've Fashioned." This is a poem I fashioned from a journal entry. Sorry. I was hysterical one night. The moon was being weird. I sent you nudes that made my ass look rounder than it is and wrote, I think we should have sex when I'm in town. I put a deposit down on a hand tattoo that Kyle says will make me look like I've been to prison. I ate half a vegan bean wrap and a piece of cheese toast and 2 cups of sweet beige coffee, and that's it. I took a pissing selfie and posted it in the ladies fitness accountability chat, #multitasking. No one liked it. Is this what feeling my whole life is like? Is what I wrote in the journal. I'd been watching Fleabag, that was the problem. Phoebe Waller-Bridge and the moon. I reminded myself that my mother and my best friend are alive. I reminded myself I have a dog, not a guinea pig. She licked my hand over and over and I had to lie still for a while. I read some Sally Rooney, and just like that, the banana peel drying on the desk became endearing. I was endeared to myself, but now I can't remember how. Recalling drunkenness, sober. I need you to love me more than I need to remember liking myself, and I'm only a little embarrassed to admit it. I hope you like my body when we fuck. I hope you say my asshole tastes like caramel again. I never forgot that. And I hope my asshole actually tastes like caramel and you weren't just saying it to make me feel better about having a regular tasting asshole. If you haven't missed my breasts, you will after you see them in these new sheer cups. You'll miss them while they're still in your hands. All of it happened so fast. I just wanted to feel loved again by a man who loves me, to be held so normal while it's dark outside. And I wanted to smell you. This is the present tense. I want to lick your warm neck and smell that magic thing my spit does on your skin. Love really looks like this, huh? This is the transition. I'm climbing a hill or else descending quickly into a tumble. If I'm a baby's light up toy, you're the blinking default setting. I have to be loving someone else to not be loving you. What we thought was a pressed red self-destruct button is actually hundreds of windows to be nailed shut by hand. Do you understand? This coming together is part of the leaving. Sorry. Just fuck me like you did at Disney World. I swear I'll be right there with you. And the last poem I'm going to read immediately follows this poem and is called Whoever Invented Cruise Control Just Wanted to Fuck Themselves. Whoever invented cruise control just wanted to fuck themselves on a prairie highway. The experience is lukewarm at best. You can't be the fastest car on the road and also have the most explosive orgasm. But now I've done it, and that makes me cooler than you. I rinse my pussy fingers in the last sip of gas station coffee at the bottom of the styrofoam cup. I love to share a secret with myself. Here's a secret I keep telling my friends like an excuse. My body forgot how to make an orgasm with another person. I look like a woman who doesn't have a lot of sex, but I want everyone to know I like a finger in my ass and I'll stick one in yours. Will I ever come again out of the driver's seat? This is on the nose, but sometimes you just can't fuck around. It's cool to masturbate in a moving car. It's not cool to fuck your ex. And instead of stealing all his clothes and locking him outdoors to be humiliated, you ask him to stay the night. The worst thing is to know you're too good for someone you want. The worst betrayal is the one you do to yourself when you tell him, I'll always love you. Here's a secret you should know. I've always been an earnest bitch. I've always loved this way. Foot off the pedal and coasting, coasting. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Molly. First of all, I just want to say how refreshing it is to hear this kind of writing and poetry read out loud. I think, especially for women to talk about it in this way is embarrassingly rare for the fact that we live, in 2021. And so, like, thank you for bringing these collections to us. I found one of the things that I noticed when I was reading both books, and honestly, I think like so many of my friends have read them too, is the universality of these experiences, especially I think like so many women have experienced the things that are mentioned in these poems, but they're not often talked about outside of the women, like outside the circle of women. And it was something, there was a line I wrote down, Amber Dawn, from one of your poems where like her voice shivering out of frequency only other women can hear. And that really struck me. And I guess my question is, do you feel like there's an audience outside of women for these poems? Do you think that there is a broader audience that's receptive to it, or does there need to be? Can we just celebrate it as like as this group? And this is for both of you.
I have been very grateful to have spoken to some cis men and straight men who have reacted positively to the book. I think the parts that are speaking maybe to other than women and femmes are the parts about fat phobia in my book and internalized fat phobia. That's the piece that I find men are picking up on. And that's the thing that they sort of glom onto when they're talking to me about the book. Whether, you know, they're understanding all the nuance of, you know, the sexual assault pieces and things like that, I'm not sure, but so I guess my short answer is, yeah, I think there's an audience, but whether or not they're understanding it the way that I'm intending it is probably no.
And Amber Dawn?
So I very much wrote this book because for many years I understood how much of a part of a whisper network I had always operated within. As an experiential sex worker, of course, something like a whisper network or sharing information about clients, employers, that sort of thing has always been very paramount. And I found quite profoundly that this skill of being upfront within the whisper network and sharing information about potential harmful people translated really well actually into the literary community, and that there is a lot of sexual and cultural harassment within the literary world as we know it. And by cultural harassment, I know most listeners will probably recognize the term sexual harassment right away. I would like us to also think about cultural harassment within literature and arts communities. So that can look like small microaggressions, like asking a writer, so wait, where are you really from? Like a writer should not have to answer that question. A person of color should not have to answer that question on their day-to-day life. Or maybe a writer of color within a creative writing workshop is getting a story workshopped and someone asks or says something like, this is really authentic, like that would be to me just this little microaggression that points towards cultural harassment. So yeah, I noticed that I was in sort of whisper network that sort of debriefed and also created strategies on how to deal with sexual harassment and cultural harassment within literary communities. And I thought, why does this always have to be a whisper? Like, what would happen if, I wrote 80 some odd pages on this subject matter and put it out there as a poetry collection. But within that whisper network, there's very much men part of it. Men have always been part of my whisper network. They've always been part of strategizing like safety and dignity, both as a sex worker, but also as a writing professional. Including many male allies that I stood in solidarity with up at UBC or other, sort of major institutional spaces. So I do think both of our work has larger audiences than, say, just like women or like women who are interested in exploring, dimensional sexualities. Like I do think it speaks to more than just that. And I have to believe that. I mean, it's pretty defeating to think otherwise. But Badass Babes is who I'm writing for at the core. So if that's who mainly reads my work, and I would say, or Molly's work, or like, another like pivotal book, like Exhibitionist, like I like to think of a lot of badass babes sitting around in the comfort of their domestic sphere reading Exhibitionist. It's a feel-good image for me.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, honestly, I think with both, I can't tell you the number of times I wanted to like screen cap poems from both of you and send them to all of my friends and just be like, oh my God, this is speaking to me so much. I think one of the things, I mean, with the titles of both My Art is Killing Me and Exhibitionist, there's that, I hate to use the word vulnerability because I think it gets attached to women's writing a lot. But there is, I mean, the idea of being an exhibitionist, the idea of making a statement like that, it's such an open and bold thing to say. And I guess what has been, is there a fear of an expectation with making a title like that in terms of how much access readers expect of you?
I think with Exhibitionist, it wasn't a fear of an expectation. I was hoping they would expect something revelatory, because that really was the point of writing the book, was to sort of bear it all. It came from a place of wanting to fight against shame and wanting to fight against embarrassment and these little hatreds that we throw at ourselves just throughout the day, every hour. It's not fair, and I don't think most men are doing that to themselves all day. So yeah, the whole point of the book was to just bear it all. And I'm really glad I went with this title. It had a different working title. It was called But If I'm Here, Then Where Are You? And it was very much about sort of the man that I'm writing to in a lot of these poems, and it was sort of centering him in that way. And Sharita Warrener, who was my second reader at UBC, said, no, I think your title is Exhibitionist. And I was like, of course it is, of course it is. And it was just it should have been so obvious to me that it had to be about me. So I'm really grateful for her pointing that out, because I think it's exactly the title that it needs to be.
Right.
Can I add on to that? It's hopefully will be no secret by the time this is done, but like, if we look at the cover for Exhibitionist, we see that kind of like black censor bar across this figure's nipples. And it's Molly's name in that bar. But when I think about the word exhibitionist, I do kind of think of like almost a flasher, like how we get to see, a lot of like women and femmes bodies like this sort of like, woo, flash. And I really love that, not only for the fact that this book really explores like dimensional sexuality, but there's a lot in your work, Molly, if you'd agree with me, that like intimacy is very ephemeral, and you can hear that in like a lot of your poems are almost structured like a list poem, where you're like jumping from, making these beautiful poetic leaps from thing to thing to thing to show how temporary, like intimacy can be, and how it's always layered in, other kinds of emotion like insecurity or, you know, that sort of thing. And so, yeah, so for that reason, I really love the ephemeral nature of the book and the idea of the exhibitionist, who is a figure we just see in flashes. Yeah. Basically, I could just do a talk on your book because I love it so. It really, honestly, when it came out, it was, you know, pandemic times, and I think many of us were scrambling for these touchstones to read, you know, within the isolation. And isolation is a terrible thing for artists and survivors to feel, right? And Exhibitionist just really, it gave me that touchstone. So thank you.
Thank you. I reread My Art is Killing Me this morning. The first time I read it, I just picked it up in the Prism office because it came in as an art. And I wasn't in the mood to read. I didn't have time to read. I just like opened it up to the first page, and then I didn't put it down. I couldn't. And it takes a lot for me to read when I'm not in the mood to read. Like I actually don't read very often. And it just, it hooked me from the beginning because like with your title, My Art is Killing Me, you are setting up this expectation that you're about to put literature on blast a little bit, or you're about to put art on blast, yet there's such a reverence for poetry in it, and that tension is so propulsive as you're reading it. So I just have to throw a little bit of love back to you, because I read this morning and I sobbed, and I just remembered why poetry is great, and that's a little bit hard for me to remember these days.
This is an unplanned love fest, by the way, all you listeners out there. If you admire, you know, an author or a friend, or just some badass hottie in your life, take a moment, you know, take a moment to let them know.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think it's something we don't do enough in general, is just like enthuse over things that deserve it. Now I'm like lost. What I was going to say was talking about you know, reading and poetry, and there is sometimes that sense that poetry is this inaccessible or intimidating form. And in one of your poems, Amber Dawn, you talk about you know, how the title for an article that referenced your poem was so dense that it's like, how could you even, and you say reading poetry is hard. But these are, I mean, they're beautifully crafted, and there's such art to them, but you can just tumble into the collections and read them in one sitting and then revisit. But yeah, they're so, there's an immediacy to them. So yeah, I wondered if you could talk a little bit about creating in that way.
When I started writing poetry like 5-6 years ago, I was really trying to emulate the poets that were being presented in, you know, English 101, the sort of classic, very sort of beautiful, finely crafted linguistic poetry, because that's what I thought I was supposed to do. And then poetry didn't stick for me at first, because I was like, this isn't enjoyable. I feel dumb. Like poetry is making me feel like I am not smart enough for it. But then I went through this like breakup, this absolutely horrific breakup, and all I could do was write poetry, and it was just feelings. And I think I went too far in the other direction at first, where I was just kind of spewing it out, and there was no craft at all. But then I had this lovely professor in Winnipeg, Catherine Hunter, who really supported me in learning, in bringing craft to that really hardcore emotion. And also my classmate Hannah Green was really instrumental in that, in showing me what poetry could be outside of the canon. and then I discovered all these poets like Hara Lindsay Bird and Kayla Zaga, and it just clicked. It was like, okay, I can do poetry, and I can do poetry that will not make other people feel dumb.
Right.
And that was, I mean, like, to not be dramatic, but it was life-changing, because poetry is so much of who I am now. And I don't think it needs to be only for academics, and it doesn't need to be only for other people who read or write poetry. It should be for a wider audience, because it's such a guttural, it's just emotion. That's all poetry is. So that's, I mean, if I can do anything in my career as a poet, I hope it would be to bring more people to poetry.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think there's CanLit is not always known for being overly adventurous. I think there is a new generation and a new group of voices that are coming out of it now, that are challenging that. But I think there is this sense that Canadian literature for a while has been this very polite, very structured, these are the themes, these are the styles. And so it is, it's not easy, I can imagine, to start work, like trying to see something outside of that structure. But it's really refreshing to see. And I know, Amber Dawn, in you say there's a lot of reference to the world of writing in Canada in your poetry and in this collection. And I think, I just challenging that. I mean, frankly, sort of an old boys club for a lot of it, from those who are teaching it to those who are giving out the awards. So I don't know if you want to talk about
Yeah, I mean, I think there's been many amazing and radical and countercultural moments in Canadian literature, whether those moments kind of reach sort of, a wider audience, or become kind of like canonical milestones for CanLit, is something that we could keep talking about. But I can think about two things just based on, where I've been living for the past almost 30 years now. There used to be a independent publisher called Press Gang here in Vancouver, and we would see the prevalence of Press Gang sort of in the late 80s, throughout the 90s, and then into the early 2000s, sadly, when the press could no longer continue due to financial reasons. But, I feel what we saw from Press Gang was like Larissa Lai's first book, Sky Lee, Christos, an amazing Indigenous poet that didn't, again, reach like sort of this canonical reverence that I feel like she deserves. Becky Lane, Persimmon Blackbridge. These were some really what we might call transgressive, back in the day, we'd call transgressive work. Kind of like the Dorothy Allisons of Canada, I suppose, or the Sapphires of Canada, if someone needs like a bigger reference to imagine this. Room Magazine, it was, born out of the same grit. Largely white feminists who started it. And of course, it's taken, tremendous effort, mainly from Indigenous women like Molly to create change there. But there has always been movements of writers who have really questioned the institution of CanLit. I think what's a more interesting question to me right now is seeing who's coming up right now, who's getting debut books, who's winning awards now that used to go to that so-called old boys club, as you mentioned. How do we make sure that these writers' long-term careers and stability and dignity is preserved within Kenlet. Like, how do we not burn out writers who are working with trauma and identity as the crux? You know, like, where's the long-term support for, you know, these creative movements, which have always been here. It's just they get stamped out, you know, the small presses go bankrupt, or there's like an amazing badass writer who, like, you know, never writes another book, and like you don't even know where they are anymore because it's been so tremendously hard to navigate the writing and publishing world. Like, how do we make sure that doesn't happen anymore? And that's, I mean, I think that's something that we can take to a festival, you know, like the Kingston WritersFest, or into the classroom, or into the magazines that we volunteer at or that we work for, and just try to make sure that Canadian literature remains vibrant and not monolithic, you know, and not what some of us grew up with in terms of like what's canonical or what's valuable, like that we just get to question who's not being represented, and move forward with that.
Yeah, and talking about burnout, I mean, it's always difficult for like the quote unquote trailblazers, because they're the ones that are expected to answer all the questions, be the representative. And I can't imagine, I mean, you talk about it a bit, but like the energy it takes to get all those messages from sexual assault survivors that are, you know, reaching out to you at various stages in their level, or their journey, their recovery, their, you know, still present trauma. And there's, yeah, yeah, how do we remain sensitive to that and keep that buffer between the artist and what they're saying? And yeah, like I think it's an important, I think your title was important for that reason, because I also thought it was interesting in your book because you distance at times the I is not I, but the I is always you, the reader. And I think that's an important thing for us to realize too, as challenging that idea as we're not consumers, we're sharing this experience with you. So we're getting amazingly already close to the end of the event. So if people have questions that they want to post into the Q&A, just a reminder that you can do so. It's at the bottom of your Zoom screen there. I wanted to talk, Amber Dawn, just briefly about the fantastic art that you have in the book. Yeah.
Yeah, so this is Jake Puppy Teeth. He's a Vancouver-based artist, super duper gay and art and dark. So a lot of these sort of death and skeletal cartoons. There's 3 of them within the book are his artwork that he adapted. Yeah, that he adapted for the book in particular. Which, I mean, artwork's so important. You know, like cover design, all of that. I really love to think about, you know, how the book looks as an object, and how that object interacts with, you know, the text itself. You know, even just the paper quality of Exhibitionist, I love that thick, textured paper. Like, it just seems like such again, like an old canonical book, but then there's like crock pots and sleep sacks, you know, like I love the irony between the way the book feels, even the paper quality and the text within.
Totally. Yeah, and I know that artists or authors don't always get to choose the design for their cover. So obviously, Amber Dawn, you you did. Molly, did you know what your cover was going to look like?
Yeah, I chose the art as well. The artist's name is Molly Fisher-Levine, and everyone should check her out on Instagram. Her stuff is stunning. And I was really drawn to this image in particular because I had a chapbook that came out in 2018, and it was the same sort of illustrative style, but it was an empty room, and it was just sort of the remnants of a woman, and the title is I Don't Want to Tell You. So this piece of art to me was sort of the other side of the coin to that, is the reveal. Here's the woman, she's the focal point of the room now. So I think it speaks a lot to the way I held back a little bit in the chapbook, because I was a younger poet, and I think there was a lot I was afraid to put into the world. And then with this book, I kind of just said, fuck it. And I think the two covers are perfect for what the books are.
Yeah, absolutely. Speaking of like being a poet and putting yourself out there, you also have a few poems in your collection that are like homages to different authors. One that I thought was really beautiful was the one that after Rosanna Deerchild, the Pinky Drum, and I wondered if you could talk about that one.
Yeah, so that poem was inspired by Rosanna Deerchild's collection, Calling Down the Sky. And in that book, through a lot of that book, almost half of it, I think, Rosanna enters the voice or the persona of her mother, who attended residential schools. And in Pinky Drum, it's my mother's voice. It's a voicemail that she left me one night after I had already fallen asleep, and she's talking to me about our identity. And she had made a comment that she'd made a comment earlier that day that was like, we have about a pinky's worth of Métis in us. And I think she must have sensed that I like bristled at that a little bit. And so she left me this really lovely voicemail later about how being Métis feels like there's a little drum in her pinky and no one knows it's there, but she can hear it. And when I listened to that voicemail, I immediately thought of Rosanna entering the voice of her mother. And then that's sort of just how the poem was born.
Well, it's beautiful. And, you know, like you do have another poem about blood quantum. And I read that poem to a friend of mine who also, I think, is tentative about identifying or being public about being or having Indigenous background. And like she said, like her heart just broke open. She was like, that is beautiful. She's like, that is, it spoke to her. She's like, this is my favorite poem I've ever heard. So yeah, it was really beautiful. I have a question here from Anuja. Were there voices you were reading, listening to, etc., that helped put you in the headspace / heart space to work on your books?
I find it difficult to read other people when I'm trying to write. But the one book that was probably the most important to forming my sort of poetic style is Hara Lindsay Bird by Hara Lindsay Bird. Because of the way that she, the plain speak of her poetics, and the statements. Like I love the poetic statement that really sort of hard stop. This is what's happening. This is how I feel. And also the way that she uses pop culture very unabashedly, which I don't think is super common in poetry, to have, you know, a poem about Monica from Friends. And it's just something I really admired about her. So I wasn't necessarily reading it while I was writing, but I was thinking about the way that she built her book while building mine.
And Amber Dawn?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of reflected back on women authors that I admired and that I feel like were trailblazers before me, who went on to also publish essays or letters or appear in interviews talking about what it has felt like to kind of hold the particular kind of space they held within literature. Dorothy Allison's One or Two Things I Know for Sure was a book that I returned to a lot. Now that's a nonfiction essay collection by Dorothy Allison, who wrote Bastard Out of Carolina famously, and many other works that are excellent. You know, and in that book, she talked a lot about censorship, of course, being censored throughout her career, but also the expectation of women who are writing dimensional sexualities. And she talked a lot about being a survivor, but also being, you know, really, really sex positive, you know, as she might have said in the 90s, and how readers almost just couldn't, they just couldn't with that. Like it was, you know, it was either going to be a trauma narrative, survivor's narrative, but they didn't want like the sexy hot stuff in there. You know, so I looked at that a lot. You know, I looked at, you know, like Sapphire, who like, there was people who wanted her National Endowment for the Arts Award stripped away from her because she did have so much explicit sexuality mixed in with some of her survivor poems, and like how it's kind of like, yeah, like I think, you know, we don't get to be dimensional in our sexualities. People really want either or, which is interesting because people want that with poetry too. You know, when people say they don't understand poetry, I think it's because they want to land on a right way to interpret poetry. And there is no either or. Like there's just this, you know, giant vast spectrum of like feeling and interpretation. And I feel that way about sex. So I just, you know, I kind of reflected on who's put themselves out there as authors before, and who faced censorship, who faced, you know, discrimination or, you know, trolling on the internet or invasive questions during their Q&As. And yeah, and I just tried to hold all those writers close as I worked on my own book.
And you have a really fascinating / depressing kind of history of the internet, speaking of, and sort of how censorship has progressed, regressed from, you know, the beginnings where everyone's post was their own property to this place where increasing levels of quote unquote protection, specifically around sex, specifically around specific hashtags and voices, and often the most marginalized people have just increased and increased and increased, while other voices, which are like more harmful, more intimidating, more harassing, are given traction.
Yeah.
So
yeah, but the forces that want to censor and silence our dimensional sexualities are very much alive and well, as well as like activism and movements, you know. So actually, you know, we're amazing. Just even saying pussy on the internet, we don't always get to do that. If we actually put hashtag pussy and post it somewhere, we could expect to get shadow banned. And if we went some steps more explicit, we could expect maybe for our profiles to even be, you know, temporarily locked out. So I don't know, say pussy on the internet, like what, or whatever that means to you, right? But I do think that we've never evolved to a place as a society where the you know, the dominant culture, or like the power holders, are okay with us being dimensional, right?
Yeah, well, and you talk about the sort of ignorant conflation of sex work with sex trafficking, and I do love how you say, like, I'm not going to go into explaining this to you. You can do your own work, and I think that's an important statement to make, because there is often this expectation that it is up to the outsider to explain themselves, to educate, you know. But I also I loved the line, "My kink is to loudly love those who have been told to keep quiet." So, and I think that that's such a beautiful sort of like summarizes your work so well. And I think like for Molly too, you know, it's amazing the idea that like you talk about like farting to seem casual in front of a guy, and then suddenly he doesn't want to make out with you anymore, right? And it's like you don't even see the word fart on, like, when's the last time you read the word fart in a poem? Right? There it's so refreshing to see. But yeah, we want this idea that, you know, if a woman is talking about her sexuality, she is all sex appeal, she is all, you know, beautiful and fantasy worthy. You know, we don't want to see that she had to shave her legs and she had to get waxed and that she's, you know, got to go to the bathroom halfway through the night. So so thank you for being those voices for us.
Thank you for making the space for us to feel comfortable reading. I mean, I picked out sort of my like saucier poems for tonight, and I wore my little like lingerie top, and I just feel like I would not wear this to many events, but it felt like a really great space tonight. So thank you to you, Aara, and Amber Dawn, and to Kingston WritersFest.
Well, thank you. That is a beautiful thing to hear, and I appreciate that. Because that was my goal for tonight, and I hope that you both felt that way. We have a few minutes left if anybody else has any last questions. I feel like for an event called Brazen Tongues, everyone's being so shy. But maybe you're all just, you know, excitedly going out and ordering copies of the books right now. Yeah, I don't know if either of you have closing statements, closing words, closing comments.
Molly, I have a question.
Yeah.
For you. That for young people who feel embarrassed all the time, did you know that was going to be sort of like the opening epitaph or the opening dedication for the book, or did that come a little later on in the process?
It came later on. Originally, I was going to dedicate it to my 5th grade teacher, who I told when I was 10 years old. I said, I'm going to dedicate my first book to you. And I was like, oh, I don't know if she'll want to be associated with this. It's like, maybe I'll leave that for like my nice YA novel that I write in the future. But it, as I was sort of going along in the writing process, it became clear that I was writing to a younger self, and from the place of feelings of my younger self. And, you know, I was thinking about my sisters reading this book and hoping that they could avoid some of the shame that I really lived in for a lot of my sort of youth, my late teens and early 20s. So it just felt right that's who it would be for. Thank you for that question. Are we at time, or do I have time to ask a quick question?
Go for it. They're, you know, this is the last event of the day, so.
I wanted to ask you if there is a piece of any of your books that you look back on and you're like, I can't believe I published that, or I can't believe I gave them that piece of me. Or
I'm sure there is, but I live in a bit of a dissociative state from what I've previously written. Like, of course, during kind of like the first year, hopefully writers get opportunities to read from the work. I have been privileged in that way to get to read to audiences from my book, but there is a part of me that once a book's about a year old, like it's almost like an ex. Like I'm like, okay, I've processed what I need to learn about that relationship, and now I'm just gonna block. And at this point now, it's I'm 5 books and 3 anthologies, and so more than a decade of publishing, and I have been asked to do a few retrospectives where I've been asked to read kind of like from my body of work, and it really surprises me what it feels like to go back, and you talked about your first chapbook and realizing, what earlier in your writing career, you were able and perhaps not able yet to say. But mostly, speaking of like the former self and like the journey to the former self, I have this testament now. I'm so lucky that I can go back to something that I wrote, as an undergrad, or something that I wrote, in like the early 2000s. And I try to just be really gentle with myself and think, like that's what was palpable for me then. And that younger version of me needed that piece to be out there in the world. And I love her, right? Little mitten, I love that former self. So yeah, I try not to go to that like, whoa, I can't believe I did that. But I definitely had times in the creative writing workshop where I brought some things to the workshop and I'm like, I think I just fucking made everyone deeply uncomfortable here. Maybe I should think about like a content warning next time. I don't know. I have those memories where I'm like, oof, like, yeah. I could ask you the same thing. Like, do you have things like and you also did the creative writing trajectory too, where you did an MFA. Like, do you have things that you look back on and you're like, whoa, I put this out there?
Yeah, my one big thing that is like the thing that if someone really wanted to cancel me, they could like pull it up and be like, look what she did. Like the first poem I published, it was in CV2, and I'm claiming like OG Cree ancestors, because at the time I didn't understand that just because you have an Ojibwe ancestor and a Cree ancestor does not make you OG Cree. And I just get like, I get like that icky feeling when I think about the fact that was the first poem that sort of like launched me onto literary society. And it was so, I just wasn't at a space in understanding my culture and my identity where I should have been writing that yet. So that's sort of my ick moment. But in terms of like revealing things that feel true, I don't think I have anything like that.
I would love to keep talking with you both. It's been such a pleasure. So thank you so much to Molly and Amber Dawn for joining us tonight. I'd like to congratulate our winners of the book draws. So funnily enough, Steve Page, who is Molly's author patron, has won a copy of Amber Dawn's My Art is Killing Me. And Lynn Barron has won a copy of Molly's Exhibitionist. And, I can't recommend the 2 books enough. They are available now at Novel Idea Books downtown in Kingston. You can order them online, in person, over the phone, or visit your local independent bookseller if you're not here in Kingston and pick them up. They're both excellent reads. And I just want to thank you again for joining us tonight for the day 1 of our late night series here at Kingston WritersFest. And I look forward to seeing you at events this weekend. So once again, thank you everyone. And thank you, Amber, Dawn, and thank you, Molly.
Thank you, Aara.